with Jackie Martinez of JPM Legal. Jackie, why don't you tell us about yourself and your law firm?
Uh, I have been practicing immigration law for about more than 30 years at this time. As an attorney before that, when I was a law clerk, I worked with a Mexican American group out in California. We did immigration law out there. And the law firm is a small firm. It's myself and another associate, and we have some support staff. We've actually trimmed down our staff since COVID. We used to have a very large staff, and after COVID, we kind of slimmed down, and things have been going really well with slimmer, faster, more efficient force.
What kind of immigration do you practice?
We do the whole gamut. We do everything from family immigration to business immigration to removal to appellate work to petitions for review. So we do the whole spectrum of immigration law.
Wow. So, what is the process like when you apply for asylum?
Well, first of all, we meet with the client. A lot of times the client does not have an asylum claim. With recent changes in the asylum laws, that we have to be very careful about what type of cases that we're filing. It used to be that back in the 90s and 2000s, most of our asylum cases that came in were from Eastern Europe and Africa, and they had solid asylum cases, and we would take on these cases all the time. Things began to change when we started getting immigrants from Central America. And we were looking at gang violence, especially El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. Now we're looking at gang violence in Ecuador and in other countries. So it's changed a lot. And we have to really ferret out what the issue is, what the claim is, and whether or not they have a claim. So that's how we start. It's just interview and we talk. It's important that we talk. Sometimes clients are real hesitant to speak to us. So we find that a face-to-face or a Zoom or a WhatsApp interview works best, because then you can see someone face-to-face, and then you can look at their body language, and you can say, hey, I know there's more, and you can pull out more information for them, and we're trying to see if there actually is a claim. And then we file the application. And we have two types of asylum cases. We have affirmative asylum cases and defensive asylum cases. Our affirmative asylum cases are people that are not in removal proceedings, and they're here in the United States. They've been here less than a year. And then we go ahead and file those cases with USCIS. Our defensive asylum cases are people who are in removal proceedings, and they're filing an application so that the judge hears their case and they are not removed.
How long does it take to get an asylum application processed?
If you are processing an affirmative asylum case, usually it would take maybe between 3 months to 6 months to get an interview. In the last several years, we've had cases that have been pending for a year and a half. We have some cases that were filed pre-Trump in 2016, and those cases are still pending. So it really just depends. And what happens when these cases are pending for such a long time is that the person remains here on a work permit, and then we just wait for the interview to go through USCIS. It could be a positive, it could be a negative. A positive, they get to stay here, they get to work here, and they get to have a life here. The negative is their asylum claim may grow stale. So by the time that we go to USCIS, the issues don't arise anymore. For example, El Salvador. Things are different. The government has changed. The gang violence is no longer there. So that's a negative. So that's always something that we consider when we have an asylum claim pending for so long. If it's a defensive claim, then the time depends on how the court is proceeding. If they are detained, then it will proceed at a much faster pace because they're on the detained docket. If they're not detained, if they are released on bond or on their own recognizance, then it could take 2 years, it could take 3 years, depending on what the docket is like and what court. For example, here in Pittsburgh, we're in the Philadelphia docket, and that's taking about maybe 2 to 3 years to go to a final hearing.
So how would someone apply for a green card?
It depends what kind of a green card, and here's my visuals. So there's 5 ways to get an immigrant visa, which is a green card. Family, that's the main one, and that's your mother, father, brother, sister, child, or spouse. Next one is business, and that's employment-based, and that's an EB1, which could be, these are your Nobel laureates, your PhDs, or your AB2s, which are your master's degrees, or your AB3, which are bachelor's or skilled, and then EB4s and EB5s, which are your investor visas. The next is lottery, the diversity lottery. That's the one of the major ways that a lot of people get their green card, is that they're lucky and they're from specific countries and they get the lottery. The fourth one is, of course, asylum. And that's what we're looking at for a lot of clients that do not have family or do not have an employment base. And the last one is those special immigrant visas, like special immigrant juvenile, violence VAWA, Violence Against Women's Act, U visas, T visas, S visas. Those are the special visas. And there's also cancellation and all those other defensive avenues that we have when they're before deployment.
So what is refugee status and how is it different from asylum?
Usually, to be determined to be a refugee, you're determined to be a refugee outside of the country. Let's give an example. So for example, you are Somali and you had to leave your country for whatever reasons, war, famine, and you ended up in Kenya. And then you go to a refugee camp in Kenya. And there in Kenya, you go through the process and you're determined to be a refugee. If you're determined to be a refugee, then you get resettled. And there's several countries there that have resettlement agencies, and you go through those agencies. Here in the US, in the Pittsburgh area, we go through Catholic Charities or some other Lutheran services that resettle people here in the area. And then they come here as refugees. So they enter the US as refugees. They're provided services through the resettlement agency. And a lot of it could be, helping them get a job, English classes, helping them with the daycare. Some of the basics is finding an apartment, how to drive a car, open a bank account. So they get help from the settlement agencies to get their life settled here in the U.S. And after they go through that process, then they are eligible at a certain point in time to get their citizenship and their green card as well. So first their green card and then their citizenship.
As an asylee or a refugee, can someone travel outside of the United States while their case is pending?
If their asylum has been granted and they are traveling outside of the U.S., they can go ahead and travel. They can get what's called a re-entry permit or a travel document. Oftentimes it's called a white passport because it looks like a white little passport that they travel with. So they can do that. They just cannot go back to their home country. As a refugee, the same thing. They're eligible to travel if they need to, but you always have to be careful about why would you be going back to your home country if you're seeking refugee status from that. I usually caution my clients not to travel on a refugee status unless they have to. We say, hey, let's try to get your green card. Once you get your green card, then you'll be at a better position to travel. Now with this new administration, there's a lot of caution for people. I myself am a U.S. citizen and I traveled outside of the country when Trump was inaugurated, and I was like, oh, they're gonna let me back in. Because you never know. We did have the Muslim bans and all other things last time that he was the president, so we do have to express caution. And I tell people, do not travel unless you have to travel, unless it's a real dire emergency.
Now, what happens if someone doesn't have legal documentation to be in the United States?
Well, if somebody enters the country through one of the borders, Canada, or through the southern border, or even through a ship, we have a lot of Asian clients that enter through cargo ships, or through a speedboat that takes them from, one of the islands to Florida or somewhere else. They are entered without inspection. We call those EWI, entered without inspection, and they do not have any documents. If they come into the country and they turn themselves into ICE or CBP, and then they are processed through, and they might be going through the court system, and then we see them when they go through the court system. Once they go through the court system, they come to see us. We determine what application they file. Usually, if they file an asylum claim or something else, then we're able to get a work permit for them. However, many, many, many millions of people are in the country without any documentation, meaning they've never had any contact with ICE or Border Patrol, and they're just here without documents. And they may have been here for 5, 10, 15, some clients we have that have been here for 30 years. and they're undocumented. We also have what we call out of status or OOS. These are individuals that enter the country with legal status and they lapse, their status lapse. For example, a visitor visa, they come in here, they get 6 months to visit the country, they overstay, and then they're here without status. They also may not be, have any kind of documentation, and again, we see what we can do for them. Could they possibly change their status through family? A lot of times they would marry a U.S. citizen, or maybe they have a mother, father, or a child that is a U.S. citizen, then we might be able to do something with them in the future.
How can someone check the status of their immigration case?
Again, it all depends on whether they're with the court, and if they're with the court, they have an A number, and you could call the 1-800 number for EOIR, and that's Executive Office of Immigration Review, and they could punch in their A number into the phone system and see what their status is, when they have a court hearing, whether or not they had a deport order, or whether or not they're even before the court, and their documents have not been presented to the court yet. If you have someone that just entered without status or overstayed their visa, they probably do not have an A number. What we often do is we file what's called a Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, and we try to get their file from the various agencies to see if there's anything on file for them. Most of the times there won't be anything, and we won't have anything. Sometimes we even do an FBI background check to see if there's been any kind of hit on anything from FBI.
What happens if an immigrant gets into trouble with the law while their immigration status is pending?
Well, things are changing, things are evolving, and since the last 45 days here. So, previously it used to be that if you had a criminal contact, that it would not rise to the level where ICE would get involved until there was a conviction. And it depended on the charge. Usually if it was a summary, there was not an issue. If there was DUI, there was not an issue because they would be eligible for ARD, and that would not be considered a conviction. And if it was a criminal charge that went to the level of aggravated felony, then yes, ICE would get involved and they would be held under mandatory detention. With recent changes in the law, they've expanded what can be considered something that you may be detained for. It could be shoplifting, and it doesn't have to be a conviction. It could just be a charge. It could be DUI if, definitely if there's more than one DUI and they're constantly getting DUIs, that could be a problem. They could be pulled for that. So things are different right now. What we always suggest to our clients, especially our younger clients, is, don't get involved with the police at all. And, the main reason a lot of people have contact with the police is that they drive. We tell them, don't drive. Take public transportation, have somebody take you, take an Uber. We know it's expensive and it's very inconvenient for a lot of people who are on limited budgets and are immigrants, but that's usually a way the contact is made. We have a couple of people who are currently detained, both of them were in a vehicle. So those are what we call collaterals, and they were not driving, but they were pulled over, and after they were pulled over, they were handed over to ICE.
Can an immigrant apply for state benefits while they're waiting for their immigration case to be finalized?
I think you have to define the immigrant and what their status is. If you are just applied for asylum, if you have a work permit, no. If you have a U.S. citizen child that's born here in the U.S., yes, the child's a U.S. citizen, they qualify for benefits. If you're a refugee, then yes, you do qualify for some benefits. But basically, as an immigrant, even as a green card holder, many of those benefits are not afforded to you. You have to wait till you're a U.S. citizen to get a lot of the benefits.
What are the rights of a refugee or asylum seeker in the United States?
Well, the Constitution really relates to all persons. So pretty much under my view of the Constitution is that they're afforded pretty much all the rights that anybody else is, especially as a refugee, especially as someone who is here with a green card, they're afforded all those rights. Someone who is undocumented and does not have any documentation, if you are a recent immigrant and you do get into a situation and you may not have those rights because you may fall under expedited removal or mandatory detention. And so you will be quickly sent out of the country.
Can I apply for legal status as an immigrant if I entered without inspection?
Yes. So for example, we have lots of our special immigrant juveniles. These are children that come through unaccompanied minors, and they apply for special immigrant visas. They enter without inspection. Most of them are in removal proceedings. If they show under family court that they've suffered neglect, abuse, or abandonment by a parent over in their home country, then we're able to get a family custody determination and the SIJ determination. With that, we can go and get them a visa through the special immigrant visas, and then they can get a green card. That is a possible avenue for a lot of our children, but they do have to wait. The process does take a long time, 3 to 4 years. It takes a while. So we often start with them as soon as possible. Now they have to apply for these visas before they age out, before they turn 18. Once they turn 18, they're no longer eligible for this visa.
What are the chances of an asylum application being granted if it was affirmative or defensive?
We always try to do affirmative asylum first because you get 2 bites at the apple. So we go before USCIS and the asylum office in our district here goes to Arlington, Virginia, and they get an interview there by an asylum officer, and they get to tell their story, and they get to provide evidence. We get to provide some testimony witnesses if they have witnesses, and then they're able, if they have a good case, then they might be able to get granted asylum by USCIS. If they're not granted asylum by USCIS for whatever reasons, maybe they've applied after the 1-year bar, or the asylum office finds that they did not have a credible fear or belong to one of the special particular social groups, then they are referred to the judge. Now we get a second bite at the apple, so we get to present our case before a judge. And it's a little harder standard than it would be at USCIS, but a lot of times we have cases that are not done well because a lot of people do their own affirmative asylums and do not hire counsel. So maybe they went through and did the interview, they didn't present the evidence, or they didn't present expert testimony or corroborative evidence, and so then we do that before the judge, and they're able to get a grant before the judge.
What should someone do if they encounter ICE?
That's a tough one. It depends under the circumstances under which they encounter ICE. So like I said, if they're in a vehicle and they are stopped for apparently no reason at all, and they are detained, we could always try to do a motion to suppress and hopefully get them released. If they are detained in a workplace raid, that's a little bit more difficult because usually they are, not able to leave the premises and they're there. As always, anytime you have an encounter with law enforcement, you have a right to remain silent, and we always encourage people to remain silent. And the officers, it's their burden to prove that you're here without status. A lot of times we have people who are with a status pending. For example, our kids. They are, like I said, they're waiting for 4 years before they can actually file something for their visa. And so in that situation, we say, present your documents if you have them with you, and let them know that you're in a status pending. A lot of times the officer would not be bothered with them and leave them alone since they have something that's filed. But sometimes they're detained. It depends under what circumstances. In a workplace situation, we always tell people, don't work with a fraudulent document, and that's a big problem. Fraudulent Social Security numbers, fraudulent green cards, any kind of fraudulent document, don't work with those documents. We know that it's a hard situation for a lot of people because people have to work, but we will be saying, try not to do that. And unfortunately, when people come across the border, they have, families back home that they're taking care of, they have debt back home that they're taking care of, they have to live here in the US, and so they have to work.
What should someone do if they're detained?
If they're detained, they get a chance to call someone, and I tell people you should have a plan. And your plan should be that one person whose phone number you know, and because everybody has their phone numbers on their phones, be a phone number that you know and you've memorized, and that's your contact person. And that person should be able to access your home and get any documents, get any passports, birth certificates, or anything like that, have access to your home. If you have a pet, they can access your home and take care of your pet. And also be able to contact somebody, a family member, or somebody who is able to hire an attorney and try to get you out on bond. We are able to get people out on bond, and knock on wood, that's still available. If they're someone that's not a flight risk, if they have ties to the community, if they do not have criminal records, then we're able to provide that evidence to the court, and the judge has been giving bonds. So, you know, that's always something, but you have to have a lot of this taken care of ahead of time, so you need to have a plan. So, you know, we tell people, be prepared. The other thing is, you know, all these things cost money, so we tell people, be prepared financially, that you should have some savings to take care of this. A lot of times, they're not able to get bonds because they're under the situation where they can be expeditedly removed, or they had a prior deport order. In that situation, they will be quickly sent to the border or sent back home, usually within the month.
Thank you. This was so insightful. Thank you for sitting down with me and answering these questions. Again, this was Attorney Jackie Martinez of JDM Legal.
Great, thank you.